Yes, I will say I'm so excited. I didn't realize I was talking to you. My parents showed me your reaction video, and my dad loved it. Like, I have not been watching a lot of them, and I try to stay away from it. My dad was like,
Yeah, yeah.
for Father's Day, he made me watch your video. He was like, "This is a really good video. This guy knows what he's talking about." I was like, "Dad, oh, watch this," and we watched it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, so great!" And I sent it to Dan, and then here you are.
Nice to meet you too, man. I saw your reaction on YouTube. I thought that was pretty deadly.
Dude,
Hi.
so excited to meet you, man. I'm
Yeah.
I'm so thrilled.
Hey guys, it's been a minute. Let's just get into it. I have a non-spoiler review for you of 2022's Prey. Roll the intro. If you haven't watched my reaction to the trailer, go ahead and give that a watch, because it's not just my reaction. I give kind of like an interesting breakdown of just why this film is important and a bunch of other context to, what I think about this film and why I think it's important. But the thing is, I have seen the film now, and it's exciting. To start off, this film is a Predator spin-off. It's intended to be kind of like Rogue One or Solo in the entire Star Wars franchise. So it's kind of meant to be kind of a side thing. It takes place in the early 1700s among the Comanche people. We follow Naru, who is played by Amber Midthunder, and Tabe, who is played by Dakota Beavers. And in this film, they are brother and sister. A creature appears to them, and they have to figure out how to survive this creature. It's pretty straightforward. So to start off, again, I actually really loved this film. And of course, I might be a little biased, even from a more objective or storytelling perspective as well. It delivers on what it promises, in my opinion. From the point of Native representation, it also delivered surprisingly well, and I was actually very impressed with how they handled the cultural nuances of our characters, the world they live in conjunction with the overall story of this freaking predator. With, Native representation and story combined, Naru, I was pleasantly surprised that her character is definitely a character. Amber Midthunder does a really good job of embodying what this character wants and what she is looking for. And when it comes to thinking about Native women, this is talking just from my own experience, just the way she carries herself, the way that she talks, the way that she is just asserting herself. I know plenty of Native women in my life who are a lot like her and reminded me of them through her performance. But I don't know, I thought her, capturing the essence of Native femininity, but also Native warrior energy, she balanced that really well, and also just making her character sympathetic and you understood why. And the next person I want to talk about is Dakota Beavers as Tabe. Now, Dakota Beavers, this was his, as I speculated in my trailer review, my trailer reaction, but this is definitely his first ever acting role ever. And he did one hell of a job for a first-time actor, and I was very impressed with how Dan Trachtenberg really did a good job of directing Amber and Dakota in their relationship as Naru and Tabe, and their relationship as brother and sister. Their dynamic, I thought, was very well directed, and their chemistry was, just, you could easily see it on screen, and I thought that was really good. And he also had some solid performance in fighting and fight choreography and stuff like that. I was very impressed with this first-time actor. And his character also just, he was just a cool dude. I enjoyed his character. His character was someone who knew their strength, but was also, he understood his sister. I respected that about his character. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the Yachtja, or the Predator. If you're a super nerd, these beings are known as the Yachtja, but this particular one was hardcore. He reminded me a lot of the Yachtja in Predator 2 and AVP 2, the Wolf, because each of these predators, they're kind of given these names because they don't have names, and so the fans like to put names on them. So this one was the Feral Predator, but this Feral Predator, his design really reflected his style of, just really, I mentioned in my speculating more on how it looked, but he was just efficient and scary. And Dan Trachtenberg mentioned that he wanted the Predator to look more creature-like, and they really did make him more creature-like, which I thought was really cool. Lots of interesting, cool new weapons and some pretty bloody and gnarly kills. And I'm kind of, I like that in these types of movies. I just thought it was cool. It was very brutal, very just really in your face and quick and just awesome. But this Yachtja by far is just very, very intense and very intentional. And the body performance by, I think, Dane DeLegero, the body performance I thought was really cool. This Predator had some personality to him, which I thought was really cool. You could definitely see that it was thinking and, had a way of just navigating this new world that it was in, and it reacted to the people in an interesting way. It had some character to him, very much like Scar in the first AVP film. He had some character to him, and I thought that the performance and the direction and the design really helped me feel like this Predator really was a formidable force against all of these people. So when it comes to the film and the story as a whole, it felt like the Yachtja that it was efficient. A little too efficient. I wish it was just a little longer. I wish it had at least 15 to 20 more minutes worth of story. Maybe some character stuff or some fighting and stuff like that, but that's just me. It felt a little too short. It is an hour and 30 minutes, but it really packs in a lot of good stuff in an hour and 30 minutes. That's my only gripe, though, is I wish it was just a tad bit longer. But I mean, going back to the story overall, it was efficient. It was it's very tight. I really enjoyed how there's some setups and payoffs with very specific things throughout the film, and I'll get to that in my spoiler review. But there are things that just are mentioned and are set up, and then it pays off in a very interesting way. This film, thinking about culture and story, did what I think Antlers try to do, was where they get elements from the culture and then they incorporate it into the story. But the thing is, it's like this film went all in utilizing certain cultural elements and fully utilizing it in the story. And because they did that, it came off very well. And I just thought it was the way that certain things in the story flowed just really worked for me personally, just because I could tell that they took a lot of attention to detail, both in culture and how those cultural elements affected the story in the end. And talking about direction and everything too, the action was really well directed. I got a good sense of geography. Geography is one of those things that is really hard to direct, and Dan Trachtenberg did a really good job of letting me know that okay, so this is happening here, this is happening here. Unlike freaking AVP2, where you can't see what's going on, or other action films, just shaky cam stuff, where you can't really see what is going on because the geography just isn't well established. But this film, the fight choreography and everything, I could tell what was going on, and it was really enjoyable because I had a catharsis to the buildup of the action. So I thought that was really cool. When it comes to the tone of this film, Dan Trachtenberg actually mentioned more about tone and genre. But the thing that I appreciated is that this film knew what it wanted to be, and it kept that tone throughout. It kind of made it consistent, which I thought was really, really refreshing for some films that have a hard time knowing what they want to be. But this film had a consistency throughout. And as I mentioned, the original Predator had a mixture of action and horror. This one is more action thriller. The director mentioned that he kind of wanted to go for an underdog story, similar to that maybe of a sports film, but had action elements. So to me, it felt like a thriller period epic. That's kind of what it felt like. But that is the takeaway that it's I don't want to say that it's there's parts that aren't creepy or scary, but there is parts that are pretty that have a lot of tension, and I actually really appreciated that. But it is more on the thriller action side of, and I would argue kind of a bit of an epic as well. But the tone, though, I liked how it stuck to that from beginning to end. It didn't start off thinking that it was more horror, and then it turns into some sort of hardcore action at the end, because sometimes for me personally that throws me off. The tone just doesn't match. but this one did, and I really appreciated that. Very good direction and very thought out in the writing, and obviously the acting helped out with that and everything. And I guess for you, Dan, I have an odd question, but I guess, I notice a lot of good directors tend to set rules for themselves. And what rules did you set for yourself in making this film? Like what rules did you set up for yourself that kind of helped this film become what it was, or as close to your vision as it was? I'm pretty curious about that.
That's a absolutely phenomenal question. I think about that a lot too, and watching other filmmakers work. And certainly was a big part of the first movie I made, 10 Cloverfield Lane. There was a giant rule set placed in front of me with the location it was set. And the big thing, the one of the reasons why I sought after making this movie was to really challenge myself and see if I could do the same thing. So, now I will say never again will I make a movie that says exterior Forest Day the entire time. It's so daunting, trying to find, all the locations when it just is forest, but that's where rule sets come into play. You constantly say to yourself over and over again. So I guess I'm answering your question by not saying there was one holistic rule set, but individual moments from scene to scene, thinking about, well, this is what the narrative needs. This is what it's saying about her and what she's going through. So this is the kind of location that we want to find. So it was constantly moment to moment, like, how do I, because the world is your oyster. We're going outside, like it can be anything. It can look like anything. And always trying to find the right kind of location. Felt like it was matching where she was in her story. Yeah.
Okay, so talking about specifics in regards to the Native representation in this film, I can't go into too much detail until I talk about it in my spoiler review, but I am not Comanche, so it's a disclaimer for that. However, I do notice that when certain liberties are taken, but also when there's respect, and there is a lot of respect to this film. There are lots of things in this film that could have been kind of overplayed to the point that where it's borderline cheesy or just kind of just overplayed. There could have been things that were done that way, but they weren't. They were done quite tastefully. There is one specific thing where a song is sung, and whether or not it was a traditional song or not, it's hard to tell. But because of how they edited it and directed it, this song is sung, but then the score kind of comes in and overlays it. And I thought that was a very interesting choice, because if you know a lot about certain Native cultural elements, there are things that a lot of Native peoples just don't share or that are considered sacred. And I thought that scene in particular really struck out to me, as there is a song being sung, but then they overlay it with the score. But the score didn't detract from what was happening. The score actually enhanced the moment of when this song is being sung. So that's like one example. And obviously, like there was a lot of attention to detail, a lot in like the wardrobe and costuming, hair and makeup. Like all of it just had some intense attention to detail. Jane Myers, who is Comanche, and she is a Sundance Fellow. She was one of the producers, but she was the main producer who kind of helped oversee the Native elements in this film, and she did a phenomenal job. And it helps that she is Comanche, right? And she knows a lot about what to expect in a film like this surrounding her people, and that's one thing I absolutely appreciated. And the thing that really helped with this is, like, these Native characters are living in their world, right? The film just allows them to breathe in their world. They're not confined to a specific stereotype or archetype or anything like that. They're just allowed to be in this world. And so because of that, though, the story has a chance to just be itself, to have a story. They're not trying to kind of force certain things into the story to make it be like, hey, like this is a Native character. This is a Native story, blah, blah, blah. And that's the main thing that I actually really appreciated. And there's a lot of really cool cultural norms and cultural nuances that are suggested, and they're kind of shown, right? But the film doesn't bash you over the head and tell you like, hey, like this is what it is, this is a cultural norm, blah blah blah. It doesn't try to spoon feed you too much. It just gives you enough information to just kind of, understand. It respects the audience. So it had a really good balance of like respecting the culture and the world that it is, as well as respecting the audience. And I actually thought that was really well done and really well thought out. And I give props to, to Dan Trachtenberg and Jane Myers for, really digging deep into that. There's a lot of really cool cultural elements that play into the story, as I mentioned before, and I'll get to that in my spoiler review. But I just thought that was very fascinating and very interesting to me. One of the things that I like to talk about, I guess it's just my film school training coming out in me, but it's something I personally have always done too, is looking at themes. And the themes in this film are pretty clear cut and dry, and I really appreciated that, and they really helped give the story more heart. So the themes that I picked up is that kind of hunting and prey thing, where there's lots of little thematic things set up throughout the film, and you'll see it when you watch it, but like the prey and the predator, there's lots of that going on there. But the one thing that kind of overarches that is survival. Survival is kind of the main thing that I see in this film. The survival is the thing that is kind of the tip, and it makes the story so much engaging. And with the native elements and how the direction goes with the story and everything, out of all the Predator films, this one just had like the most heart to it, which you maybe wouldn't expect from a Predator film. But this one surprisingly just made me think deeply about survival. Again, this is coming from a biased perspective because I am native, right? And I recognize these things as I watch it. So when it comes to survival, it's even said in the film, where you saw it in the trailer, where Naru says, "It knows how to hunt, but I know how to survive," right? And there's a deeper element to this that I just thought was touching and fascinating to me as a native person watching this film. The film does attempt to display the differences between the colonial attitudes about survival and native attitudes about survival. It touches on a specific element that happened in the past in regards to hunting culture, and it really contrasts the hunting culture between natives and the early colonizers. And I just felt, if obviously anything about history of the Americas and other colonized peoples from the early colonial era, of course we were surviving before colonization, but even after colonization, survival is the main thing. It's what indigenous peoples have had to do since colonization, surviving any way that they possibly can, whether that be through fighting or simply trying to adapt to these new colonial ways. There's different ways that indigenous peoples have survived. But when looking at this film, I think there's a poetic irony about the fact that this film is about survival. It's about an outside force that is technologically advanced, has the upper hand in any way that you could possibly think. But then they, like the director intended, an underdog story of our character Naru rising up and finding unique ways to fight against this new foe. I don't want to go too deep into saying this is a metaphor for indigenous survival, but that's not really what I'm saying. But that's just what I personally picked up on. Is it's ironic and pretty poetic that the fact that this film is about survival, about a real life people during and after colonization have had to survive and against another nation that had the technological upper hand, and yet we're still here. You know what I mean? I just think the ending of this film just definitely got me touched, and it made me think deeper about my ancestors who are surviving, how a lot of indigenous people now are trying to survive in greater colonial societies all over the Americas and other places where indigenous peoples have been colonized. I just feel like this film definitely captured that intense primal urge to survive. We're still here. they tried to kill us and we are still here. And this film definitely did that for me personally. This is just my initial thoughts after seeing the film. And in my spoiler review, I'll get to more talking about specifically why I feel that is, but like, just without going too deep into it, this is just what I felt: survival and overcoming the odds. And one of the things that Dan Trachtenberg and Jane Myers tried to do with this is capture the spirit of the Comanche people, of how they survived, how they adapted, you know, their fighting styles and their archery and horseback riding, all of that. They adapted to the horse like a lot of tribes did. They adapted how to do rapid fire. They adapted how to hunt. You know, they figured things out. And our character reflects that, you know, and I just thought it was very cool to kind of see that manifested on the screen. Just, you know, there's lots of moments where it's just survive.
And then just to say one more thing about what Jane often spoke about, and what we can know when we read about the Comanche, is just how innovative they were in the way that they hunted. So though we didn't see them, you know, using the pincer movement to trap buffalo on screen, we just took that spiritually, that essence. And when Nadu develops her tomahawk, her very specific way of using it, not only is that a character thing of her bucking the trend and tradition, but it's also spiritually very Comanche to be innovative with her tools and her weaponry and her fighting.
And I just think it's, you know, there is a really cool irony that we have indigenous actors playing indigenous characters who are surviving. And I just think it was interesting to me, you know, like I wonder if a lot of indigenous actors, especially in films where they have to survive or something like that, but this film in particular, if they've ever felt, you know, some sort of looking to their ancestors for experiences and kind of looking at the collective experience of trauma and survival. You know, a lot of people talk about how, you know, we have a collective trauma, yes, but we also have a collective strength from surviving this far. There are tons of people who continue to survive in any way that they can, and we are very good at that. I always thought it would be really cool to see, you know, and if you know anything about this idea of indigenous futurism. Indigenous futurism is literally just, it's something we see more in literature, but about, like, you know, indigenous characters in sci-fi stories or fantasy stories, like they're in a future or something. But I would love to see someday later on down the road some film or TV series that takes, like, you know, hundreds or even thousands of years in the future, something like Dune, right? But like indigenous culture and people and traditions and language are like somehow still alive, right? Where these characters are just holding on. They've held on for this long. There's been revitalizations of culture and stuff like that. Like, it'd be so cool to see something like that. The only character that I can think of is Mazer Rackman in Ender's Game. And, you know, Ender's Game takes place like in a futuristic Earth timeline, and Mazer Rackman was like a fighter pilot, but he's Maori, and he is like literally the last, like one of the last Maoris alive on Earth. And he tries to stay true to his culture, and that was a very cool thing to notice, and Orson Scott Card kind of threw into his story. I just would love to see that, you know. And I would argue that, you know, this Predator film, indigenous futurism, yeah, maybe, but like, it just shows, you know, it's a genre film, like I mentioned in my last video. It's a genre film with indigenous characters, and I think it's just a lot of people are gonna appreciate it, regardless if they hate the story or not, or hate the performances, or hate the CGI or whatever. I think they can at least appreciate that, like, this is definitely a better film than the last one. It definitely had a lot of thought put into it. Well, I appreciate that. Out of all the films in the franchise, this one I think just had the most heart, and I really appreciated that. And I just feel so happy that it's with, you know, indigenous characters and indigenous cast and everything. So Dan, and you, Jane, especially too, I would love to talk to you guys again down the road, and I wish I had more time. But I really appreciate you guys and the efforts you put into this. This is a huge step in the right direction for Native representation. And I told Amber and Dakota this, but like, this is history for our people, for as a whole. especially for the Comanche tribe. Being, having that dub in Comanche is like such a big deal. And I just want to shout out to the rooftops that like this is a big thing, and
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate both of you for having the passion for story and for culture. So that's all I have left to say, but I hope to talk to you guys soon again sometime. In the end, though, it was fun. it was a fun time. I loved it. It was bloody. The action was really great. Again, Native representation was pretty well done, and in my opinion, just my personal opinion, quite respectful to this tribe. And it did a really good job of combining culture and story and making those two mix well together. And I just, again, like I mentioned, I wish it was like 15 to 20 minutes longer at least, but again, probably the studio wanted to keep it at that length. Like I mentioned already, they did a good job of kind of condensing the story and all these elements into an hour and a half long film. And maybe it'll be a director's cut. If there was a director's cut, I would totally buy that. If I were to give it a stars rating, I give it like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Letter grading, I give it like a B+, A-. So I'm also going to be doing a spoiler review down the road, probably in the next couple weeks here. I'm gonna give you all a chance to watch it, and so I'm gonna go into greater detail about why my justifications for why the things I liked or I didn't like, or the story elements and cultural elements. I have to go into spoiler details for that, so just be on the lookout for that. I'm also gonna get into like really deep nerdy lore stuff because I'm a huge nerd for the Predator franchise, and so you're gonna get a lot from me on that one. But again, I'm glad to be covering this and giving you guys my raw thoughts on it, just because I'm passionate about this, and this film, in my opinion, is still a big deal. I wish a lot of people would understand that it's a big deal for a Native representation in grand scale films and stuff like that. And so again, follow me on Facebook, follow me on Instagram. I'll see you guys in the next video. The other question I have is, what is Mupitsil? Mupitsil.
Mupits.
Mupits. Yeah.
Mupits. Pia Mupits means big monster.